Hello students. In this lecture we're going to take a look at instincts and to some extent how they relate to genetics. So let's open up our PowerPoint and we'll get started. Okay, so this material is covered in both of our textbooks. The Mother Nature book has a little bit of information on it, and so does our Agile Gene text by Ridley. So we're going to ask instincts, what are they? How do we define what an instinct is? And give you some examples of historical studies about instinct. Then we'll take a look at several examples that we've seen already that focus on instinctive behavior and genetics that maybe helps regulate or control those instincts. And we'll take a look at one particular human instinct, and that is fear. So let's think about this. So we know what instincts are. We talk about instinct. Oh, that's instinctive, or that's an instinct. We use that language a lot. But how would we define what instinct is, and what are the components of instinct? I have a whole bunch of different definitions here, and I think they all have value. So I'm going to just sort them out a little bit and give you some definitions, and you can write some of these down. So we might say instincts are inborn patterns of behavior. They're a powerful motivation or impulse, a natural or inherent aptitude, a largely heritable and unalterable tendency of an organism to make a complex and specific response to environmental stimuli. That one's a little bit longer, right? There are basically three components of instincts that we want to remember. They seem to be innate. That is, they seem to be animals seem to be able to complete an instinctive behavior without any learning experience. They seem to be characteristic of the species. All members of the species can do that behavior or have that instinct. And instincts are often a response to a specific environmental stimulus or environmental stimuli. Those seem to be the three components of instincts. Sometimes we ask, are instincts modifiable? Can they be tweaked at all? Do they require any learning? We think that instincts are in fact fully flexible, that they're not fully automatic. They do require, for example, typically an environmental stimulus. Researchers call that a releaser or a sign stimulus to trigger the instinct, okay, in many cases. Okay. Matt Ridley defines instinct as, that's our AG book, as behavior that is at least partially inherited, partially hardwired, and partially automatic, given the expected environment, or in that expected environment. Yeah, there's a lot of, it's hard to define what an instinct is, but we have an intuitive understanding of what instincts are. Can we think of some human instincts? Well, in babies have a number of instinctual reflexes, like sucking and clasping and crying. And as they get older, sitting up, moving around, walking, these are not, we don't have to teach babies how to do these things, like suckling. Some babies need a little help, but that's what we would call an instinct. Maybe there are more complex human instincts, like the sexual drive, or the drive to mate or to love, aggression, hunger drives, fear of strangers, fear of the dark, fear of heights, fear of snakes, fear of open spaces. We have a lot of fears. Are these instincts? Are they innate? Are they characteristic of the species? Are they a response to a specific environmental stimulus? Yeah, many of these are. Okay? They're complex, though, and they can, in fact, be modifiable. Let's take a look at some of the historical studies of instinctive or instinctual behavior. And a lot of these studies date back to the 1930s and 40s and 50s. There was a researcher named Nico Tinbergen, who actually is one of the founders of animal behavior or ethology. And one of his favorite research organisms was a marine fish, a fish about this big, called the three-spined stickleback. I studied three-spined stickleback for my research in graduate school. This is what I did my research on entirely. Well, Nico Tinbergen spent a lot of time with these little buggers, and they're really interesting animals. So the males and females swim out in the ocean during the most of the year, but when breeding season comes around, the males will move into these brackish water ponds or pools, and they will build nests, and they will defend a territory around that nest they'll defend it from other animals, but particularly from other male stickleback. They also develop this bright red body color, like you can see in this picture, and a blue eye, and they aggressively defend this little territory that they own, that they think they own, right? And females, meanwhile, are yolking up a big clutch of eggs. So they develop this kind of big swollen belly, and they arrive at the breeding grounds, and there might be, 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 male stickleback with their own cute little nests. And the females have to decide who to mate with, where to drop their eggs, in what nest, because the males are going to take care of the eggs. So the males will come out and start to court the females. They'll do what's called a zigzag dance to the females. They will approach her and then swim away from her. So you get this rapid darting that goes on. And she's attracted to that. She may be attracted to the red color of the male or the blue eye. Eventually, he will lead her to his nest. And she'll enter the nest. He kind of pokes his snout at her tail, quivering, so that she drops her eggs in the nest. She swims out. He swims in and fertilizes those eggs. And then the female's done. She goes on her way to yolk up another clutch of eggs. The male will stick around and take care of those eggs and even the young for a few days after they hatch. Okay, so we know the basic storyline. I want to show you a video if I can. I'm not sure if I can do this. We'll see if this will work. I want to show you this video. Oh, it has really dorky music. And it looks like I have to deal with a... Skipping the ad here. Okay. Okay, so here we've got a male stickleback zigzagging. I don't like all this stuff here on here. Okay. Zigzagging. Oh, and here comes the female. His nest is at the bottom. Oh, he's pointing her toward the nest. He's like, that's the nest. That's the nest. Oh, she's ready to enter it. This usually happens after a lot of courtship. Oh, she's not in it yet. The male is, he does another zigzag toward her. He does these little zigzags. Oh, see, he's still working at showing her the nest. He even goes through the whole nest. This is where it is. And she finally decides, I think she decides, it's time to get in that nest and drop her eggs. Now she's in the nest. He has to poke his snout at her tail, kind of quiver it a little bit so that she drops her eggs. Oh, look at her. See her eye coming out? Such a pretty animal. Okay, so this is the typical behavior of stickleback. I don't need to see anymore. Gotta get out of here. Now, here's the interesting thing. We think that, or Tinbergen said that both aggression and courtship behavior are instinctive behaviors in stickleback. So he decided to present males with nests with different kinds of models of stickleback that were very crude models, actually. And you can see these models right here and right here, okay? The models, just kind of these oblong things, one with red on the belly and one that was more swollen looking, okay? More like a female that's really filled up with eggs. And he realized that just a male, when it saw a model of this red belly, this red belly model, it would attack. It would attack that model. When it saw a model that was more swollen and silvery, it would start to court her, start to court the model. Why? Well, these models act as releasers or sign stimuli, is what Tinbergen called them, that release instinctive behavior patterns like aggression and courtship. These seem to be unlearned, species-typical behaviors that occur in the presence of a male or a female or a model that looks even something barely like the male or the female. This is an example of instinctive behavior that Nico Tinbergen kind of unearthed. He continued to study instinctive behaviors, and one of the behaviors he looked at was, he looked at in bee wolves. Females have behaviors that are very ritualized. We sometimes call these bee wolves digger wasps because they live in these big sandy environments, and there's a nice video here that describes and shows you the environment in which they live. It's kind of cool, so you can take a look at that as well. But they live in these sandy environments, and females, as adults, have a distinctive, instinctive behavior pattern and this is what they do. They will dig a nest in the sand. So here we've got a nest, kind of dig a burrow, if you will. They'll fly around it for a little bit, and then they'll leave the nest. They'll catch a caterpillar, probably sting it, drag that caterpillar back to the nest, put it in the nest, lay an egg, and then they'll leave this nest. They'll find a new place to dig a burrow. They'll dig the burrow, they'll fly around the burrow, they'll leave the burrow, they'll find a caterpillar, they'll catch it, they'll drag it back to the nest, they'll lay an egg. They'll repeat it over and over again, right? This Tinbergen called an instinctive pattern of behavior. It's innate, it's unlearned, it's completed fully the very first time the wasp digs a nest. And it is modifiable. There are some stimuli that can affect it. Tinbergen did some fun stuff where he put like pine cones around the nest when the wasp was in the nest itself. And then the wasp would leave the nest to go find a caterpillar, and he'd move the pine cones. The wasp would come back hunting for the nest by the pine cones instead of where it really was. So the animals were using landmarks, in this case pine cones, to identify where that nest is. So they were using some learned behavior, learning about the environment. You could modify the instinctive behavior, but the act of the behavior of building a nest, finding a prey, laying eggs, that's all instinctive. Here's another example. Oh, these are just all so much fun. Come from historical studies of animal behavior. He also looked at herring gulls. Herring gulls are really common gulls. You see them at the beach all the time, and they have they have a little red spot on their lower beak, or their bill, if you will, okay? And what happens when they have young is that the herring gulls will go find some food for the young. They'll bring it back, and they have it kind of swallowed, and they're holding it. And what the young gulls do is they peck at the red spot on the beak of the adult parents, and that triggers the parents to feed the young. It triggers food-giving behavior in the parents. It's considered instinctive. Tinbergen did some research on what environmental stimuli release the behavior, if you will, okay? And there's kind of two instincts going on. The young are instinctively pecking at the red bill. And the pecking at the red bill releases the food-giving behavior. So we've kind of got two instincts happening in the adults and in the young. Well, what Tinbergen did was he presented models of herring gulls to the young chicks. One of them looked a lot like an adult herring gull with a red spot on its lower bill, and then he changed the colors of the spot, and he presented one without a spot, and he asked, are these chicks, do they do the pecking behavior, that instinctive pecking behavior, or do they do it as much? What's causing them to peck? And he found out that models that had a different color or a change in position or no spot at all were pecked at a lot less. It seems that the red color in the appropriate spot is the sign stimulus for releasing pecking behavior, if you will. Okay, pretty cool example of how a particular environmental stimulus is needed for the release of this pecking behavior in gulls. It's pretty cool. So what can we kind of conclude, if you will, from these early studies? Well, we can conclude that instincts seem to be innate. They don't seem to be learned. They're complicated. They can be complex behaviors, but they often seem to be released by appropriate stimuli. Okay, the red spot on the beak, or a red fish-shaped structure that elicits aggression in stickleback, for example. Okay, they're released by the appropriate stimuli. These environmental stimuli are sometimes called sign stimuli or releasers. Okay, so is there a genetic component then to instincts? That's what we're going to find out next, or we're going to talk about next. I will move into our next video.